Hello and welcome to Jill Cameron Creations. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss a single thing. Today we're doing a card for the Polychromatic class as part of the Altenew Educator Certification Program. I'm using the Peony Bouquet stamp set, and the first thing that we're going to do is stamp an entire background with the outline stamp. I'm using pale pinks and the coral berry line of color from Altenew. I'm going to stamp the outline stamp in my background, and then I'm going to heat emboss it with satin pearl white embossing powder. A few things to remember if you're going to create an entire background similar to this. Be sure that you stamp off of your cardstock just slightly and rotate your stamp. That's actually going to give your background pattern a more cohesive and finished look than if you were to stamp it in the confines of your cardstock. Stamped my bottom row of flowers, and I noticed that it was a little bit difficult for me to see since I'm using Versamark ink and it's pretty clear. So I just went ahead and sprinkled on my embossing powder so that I could go ahead and finish out the rest of the card here. It's a little hard to see on camera where I've stamped, but it will show up at the end because that satin pearl embossing powder gives that gorgeous finish. As I'm finishing up my background here, all I'm doing is turning my stamp and finding little places to add even the edge of my stamp here so that it looks like the pattern continues off of my cardstock. Now that my entire background stamped, we can go ahead and coat the rest of it in embossing powder and go ahead and get that melted. One of my favorite parts of making cards is actually still melting embossing powder. So I don't burn my fingers. I'm using a wooden stick here just to hold my piece of cardstock in place. And I'm going to go ahead and melt all of the embossing powder on my cardstock until it's nice and smooth. You'll start to see the image show up here in just a second as we're turning it and the light catches it. And in person, this is an absolutely gorgeous background. It's just detailed and shiny enough. It is so pretty. Now we're going to go ahead and do our layered stamping with our entire peony bloom and the leaves as well. There's a little small floral image that's the little tiny bloom and then some of the leaves, and I'm stamping everything in the pinks. So we're going to be using ruby red, grapevine, coral berry, and frosty pink. And yes, I'm still using that lightest color pink, and I'm going to stamp it twice in the background of the flower, the most solid part of the flower, and that's going to give me just a little bit of a tone difference. So I have this beautiful pink on pink on pink on pink card, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I'm so thrilled with it. This is one of those kinds of cards that you can swap out the color of your cardstock over and over and over, and you can make a whole slew of them very, very quickly by creating that background on different colored cardstock, because that white satin pearl embossing powder just glows through with the color behind it. And then go ahead and do all of a different rainbow of colors for all of the stamps for all of your colors, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I love monotone cards. Just love them, as you can tell because I'm rambling a little bit. Sorry about that. So one thing that I really love about Altenew stamps, especially in their floral line, they always give you a guide to show you how to line them up. But for the most part, they're super easy to line up. Even just looking through them, you can really tell where the detail layers go in the flowers. One of the most awesome things about Altenew stamps. You see, even Lucy, I don't know if you heard her meow in the background there, but even my kitty Lucy agreed with me. So pretty. And I do all of the colors. So I did the outline in ruby red, and I'm doing the darkest part of the inside of the flower in grapevine. So there's a bit of great big distinction between the coral berry and the grapevine. And I wanted to have that real difference there so you could really see it. I also went ahead and stamped and die cut more flowers and elements for the card than I needed, so that I could do another card off camera and have the same kind of card and feel there. If you've happened to stumble across my video and this is one of your first exposures to stamping and card making, This is a stamping platform called a Misty, and I'm using it to stamp the same image on multiple areas on my cardstock without having to reposition my stamps or worry about the alignment of them. You align it once and then you can stamp multiple times with that image. See, I've just flipped my cardstock around here and I'm just inking it up, closing the door, and my images are perfectly aligned. I will say that if you have your cardstock a little bit crooked, your images are going to be a little bit crooked. So try to make sure that it's as square as you can possibly get it. I've run into that a couple of times. Now I'm also doing layered stamping, and like I said, if you're kind of new to stamping and you're not exactly sure what a layered stamp is, it has an outline most of the time, and then you have some more detailed layers along with a solid image, and it enables you to build on color and create these gorgeous, almost realistic flowers, and Altenew is great at doing that. They have some gorgeous flowers. Or you can just stamp the outline of it and color it in with Copics or pencil, whatever you want to do. I'm going to go ahead and die cut all of my elements using the coordinating dies that come along with the Peony Bouquet stamp set. And I use a little bit of washi tape to hold my dies in place. I don't use a magnetic base plate. I use washi tape just to hold it in place, nothing fancy. I have tons of washi tape. I might as well use it because I don't use it for anything else. I went through the washi tape buying craze and it just sits there. So I'm going to die cut all of these out here, and I'm using a Spellbinders Platinum 6 as my die cutting machine, and go ahead and get everything all die cut out. And for our sentiment, we're going to put our sentiment on top, and I'm going to white heat emboss that on some pink cardstock, and it's the only thing that's a different color on the entire card. Just a little bit of white here, and sprinkle that white embossing powder on. This is Altenew's embossing powder, and melt that with my heat tool. Make sure your heat tool is nice and hot before you take it to your paper so it doesn't warp your paper. If you're doing something that's kind of delicate like this, and you find that your paper might be buckling a little bit more than you think it should, heat it from the back first and then take it to the front. It'll reduce your warping just a little bit. Now I'm going to trim this down using my paper trimmer. Make sure my paper's nice and cool so that it doesn't I have put a sentiment strip in here while it was still a little bit warm and smeared my embossing powder before. Now we're going to glue everything down nice and flat, and we're going to pop up our flowers using some foam tape, and then I'm going to slip in all of the stuff around it and pop our sentiment on with some foam tape as well. Give it a try. Monotone cards are so much fun. You can get a lot of different looks out of just doing monotone colors. You could also cut this in half and have just the top part of it be in white. And I'm sorry about that. That was my cat. She is not a happy camper at the moment. You can be like kids. They fight all the time, and all of mine are fighting at the moment. Anyway, so I'm just figuring out my placement right now and making sure that everything is where I want it to be so that I can actually attach all of my elements on the front. And when I glue my panel to the front of my card, I will put a big acrylic block on it so that it lays flat and leave it there for a few minutes and let that dry before I move on, just to make sure that it doesn't slide around. And I'm just cutting some skinny foam pieces here. I want to be sure that I have enough room around the edge to be able to slide in my pieces under my flower. And I'm going to glue these pieces down flat, and I'm just adding a little bit of glue in the middle here, and I'm just going to slide that in. And then, like I said, for the sentiment, we're going to actually pop that up with some foam tape as well. And right here, I realized that even though I tried to minimize my foam, it was still a little bit snug right there, so I went ahead and cut the end of that off and pop that in behind there and leave those laying flat. Make sure they're nice and tacked down, and then I'm going to trim my sentiment piece, put on a little piece of foam tape, and pop that on the flower, and our card is all done. And I take that back. It is not done. I actually went back and added some glossy accents around my flower and little drops, and I have that coming up next. And then there's, of course, pictures of the finished card after the video. Thanks for joining me today. Y'all have an amazing day.